name is Emily Whitney, and today we're going to talk about Kennewick Man. While I go along talking, I made these little brochures for you guys to follow along with. If you open up to page 1 there, the first little section, it says, who was Kennewick Man? Does anybody here know who Kennewick Man was?
Yes.
All right, so we have some that do, some that don't. He was discovered July 28, 1996 along the river, along the Columbia River in Kennewick, Washington. He was roughly 40 to 55 years old and about 5 feet 7 inches tall. They did some carbon dating on him. Before I get into that, I kind of want to explain why they chose to carbon date this particular skeleton. As they were pulling out of his bones out of the Columbia River, they came across his pelvic bone. And there was an odd-shaped item in it, and so they tried to figure out what it was, and as they continued to remove the debris off the bone, they came across a stone, an arrowhead that was still in his hip. As you can see here, these are some ancient arrowheads, and this one is a Clovis arrowhead from roughly 11,500 BC. As you can see, they're fairly similar. The archaeologist James Chatters, who was working on this, saw this and thought, maybe this is something we need to look into. It was a good thing he did, because when they carbon dated him, they discovered that this skeleton was 9,300 years old. So he was roughly alive around 73 to 7,500 BC. Some exciting things we learned from his bones. First, we learned his age through carbon dating, but through testing the isotopes in his bones, we were able to discover that he ate primarily anadromous fish. These are fish who are born in fresh water, live in the ocean for most of their lives, and come back to freshwater spawn. These are your sturgeon, your steelhead, your salmon, such fish. Several of those found in the Columbia River, which could have very easily been why he was found there. It was where his food was. He had several broken ribs, and this wouldn't have been life-altering for him, except for his ribs didn't look the way that a normal person today's ribs would have looked. They had strange waves and bends in them, and they tried to imagine what possibly could have caused this, and there is no pressure, no matter how they tried to make it, that could actually cause his bones to break like this. So what they discovered was his ribs had broken, but because at that time in life you couldn't sit down, relax, and rest and heal, he had to continue to live with these broken ribs, and as they healed, they grew deformed. Another thing that's kind of interesting about that is that based on the wear and tear of his bones, they could tell that he walked tall. Even though he had deformed ribs and he had skull fractures and parts of his cheeks had been smashed in, there was nothing on the face of the structure of the skull that showed that he winced for a long amount of time, and he walked very tall and straight. So despite this pain, he was a very tall walking person. One thing kind of interesting, which I thought was really neat, is in this book here. And as you can see, this part of this bone right here is porous and worn down where there's the little box there. And what they discovered from that was that it showed that, or it happens when the knee is tightly flexed for long periods of time. So based on just the way his bone looked, they were able to determine that he didn't sit crisscross applesauce on the ground. He sat with his knees on the ground and his rear end resting on his heels. He did so enough that that was his primary way of resting or sitting. So as you can see, there's a lot that we can learn from the bones. Another thing we learned is that his teeth were almost completely ground down, which goes to show what they discovered is that there was probably a lot of sand that were great in the fish that he ate, and so it basically wore his teeth down. So after they found him, they discovered there was a pretty big controversy, because now, being this old, the Native Americans wanted him. Based on an act passed by the federal government, the Native Americans have rights to any Native American skeleton found in the U.S. And they have the right to bury it in the ground, so no scientist can study or desecrate the skeleton. We're going to watch a short video here, and it kind of goes over both sides of the story, or the controversy. The Native Americans' point of view and then the scientist's point of view. And this is from 60 Minutes.
Scientists, in what they propose, is unfair, does not consider my lifestyle, does not consider an Indian's lifestyle, does not consider my religion,
I really want to learn this man's story. To not be able to learn from his skeleton, I think, is the ultimate denial of his place in history.
Later this week, Kennewick Man will finally be transferred to the Burke Museum in Seattle, where the government will begin preliminary tests to determine who he is and whether he belongs in the hands of scientists or back in the earth.
So as you can see, both sides wanted him. But after a 9-year-long battle, he was placed in the Burke Museum in Seattle, Washington, where the government is currently doing studies on to try to determine whether he is Native American or of a different ancestry. Neither the Native Americans or the scientists are allowed to do any further studies on him, and until now he is under lock and key. Does anybody have any questions?
Nope.
No questions? All right, well I hope you enjoyed and everybody have a great day.